I don't know one Hispanic that does in LA or anywhere in the United States that doesn't live this duality. I mean, we can be very Hispanic, and then we've got the ability to become very American as well. So we've got this duality that reflects who we are as a people. Long gone are the days of translation, adaptation, figuring out how to fit into the total market pie. It's about customization that speaks directly to who we are as a people. Authenticity is number one. From authenticity comes a good story.
Yeah.
You can have a good story, but if it's unauthentic, it's going to fall flat. Today, it's the foundation of that ecosystem is really about data mining and strategy, and then ultimate navigation. Have a point of view. Nobody wants to hire somebody that does not have a point of view.
Right. Armando, welcome to La Convo. Thanks for joining us. I was very excited to talking to you. As I mentioned to you, I think right before we started, you're going to be our very first CEO of an agency. I think we've talked to a couple of folks already that are more client side, kind of combination, CEOs, CMOs. But I know when we were prepping to have this conversation, we talked quite a bit about a number of things, multicultural, the roles of agencies altogether, and I'd love to get into all that with you. But I guess the starting point, I wanted to talk maybe about the most recent news that just happened, which is last night, Bad Bunny announced for the Super Bowl. So I want to get your first reaction. Like, what was your thought when you saw that? What is your reaction of kind of that whole movement that is happening and having him lead the halftime show?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be happier about it, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a reflection, I think, of where Hispanic culture is, the influence that we have on society in general. His music has been, breaking records, for years. So I think it's a good reflection, and I think it's also kind of a realization that Hispanics are, big fans of football and the fandom associated with the sport, and so I think it's a nice reflection on us. I think it's fantastic.
It is, right? And I would say, thinking about the sport of football, 100% Latinos, I think big driver to the fandom that is there. I think what I find really interesting and it is exciting to your point is, I think especially him, because he's so Latino. Like he does not shy away from that. Yeah. Most places he's speaking, clearly he's more comfortable in Spanish or just likes to speak to in Spanish. And he's like almost just unbashful about the entire thing. And it's like, so there's something about that I love a lot. I know, I've talked about this in the past, that it warms my heart that we can have these kind of artists have this kind of stage without having to water down their content, without having to create necessarily the English version of it, without having to have the crossover album. And especially I think with him, he's like really that. Yeah, so it's kind of cool to see that.
He's a very strong, ambassador for, culture, tradition, language, the influence of the Hispanic market. I mean, and so the NFL has given him a stage to be able to broadcast that. I don't think we've seen that since maybe Ricky Martin. Back, when he won the big award back in the early 2000s, and I think that kind of set the stage for what we're seeing today. So I think some of the work that Ricky has done over the years has opened doors for people like Bad Bunny and others. But he's taken that stage, and I think the community in general is very proud of that.
I mean, I would even go further back. We got a chance to see a showcase a couple of months back with Gloria Estefan when she presented her latest album, and. Obviously I know Gloria Estefan, but like you kind of forget how much of an icon and trailblazer she was, right? In her moment, and continues to frankly shape and open those doors for people. So it is nice to see that kind of progression, right? That has continued.
Yeah, and we've seen it with people like Pitbull, for example, that has been very good at crossing over from Hispanic to the general market. And he's been an icon with respect to business and building brands and building kind of a new version of what the music industry and music business is all about. So these are pioneers. I mean, from Ricky Martin to Gloria to Emilio to Pitbull and now Bad Bunny. They're pioneers that have opened doors for us as Hispanics in general.
And I think it's interesting they use that phrase, right? Crossing over from Hispanic to general market. I think the point with someone like a Bad Bunny is that Hispanic is general market. Like he is driving that.
He is,
and it's really cool to see that come to life.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have talked about when I was growing up in LA, it wasn't cool to be Hispanic, right? I mean, it wasn't something that you put out there on a regular basis unless you were going to some sort of cultural event or something like that. But these guys have, opened up people's eyes to the influence and the power and the uniqueness of Hispanic. But I think one thing that, it's interesting is it's also a reflection that the Hispanic market is not this monolithic market, right?
Yeah.
Right? They're fans of football. You think that Hispanics would be more fans of soccer or perhaps baseball. But there is a huge fandom associated with football. So it talks about the Hispanic market, the relevance and the power that they have well beyond the traditional areas. It goes well beyond that, and I think he reflects that very nicely.
And it's still kind of wild to me that people get surprised that we as Latinos are multidimensional.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we can, of course, right? Of course we're fans of football and fans of soccer and fans of a bunch of stuff.
Right.
We live
this duality.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know one Hispanic that does in LA or anywhere in the United States that doesn't live this duality. I mean, we can be very Hispanic, and then we've got the ability to become very American as well. So we've got this duality that reflects who we are as a people and our experience here in this country. And people like Bad Bunny, I think, put that on display.
But obviously, this has been the world that you've lived in for a long time. So maybe, rewind the clock a little bit for me. Tell me a little bit about your roots and how you kind of got to this point. From launching the agency, was it 2005? I think is when you launched it.
Yeah.
To actually starting with on the political side, right? The political strategy. So maybe talk me a little about that, like a little bit of that history of how you got to this place.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came into this business kind of in a non-traditional way. I mean, I didn't grow up through an agency or anything like that. In fact, when I was starting out, I went to UCLA, and when I graduated, go Bruins. When I graduated, I mean, there was no Hispanic market per se. I mean, that didn't really even exist. I mean, we knew what it was, but nobody was marketing against it. So I went into another area of another one of my loves, which was, politics. So I worked on Capitol Hill and worked in communications and press strategies, and it was an amazing time because it allowed me to figure out the importance of coalition building, message development, working with image and narrative and storytelling. Some of the things that today we kind of bring to my corporate clients. So I had a little bit of a different perspective. But when we got here back to LA, I went to work for Interpublic, IPG, which is a large advertising holding company. Just recently got bought out by Omnicom, and I was running their PR services here on the West Coast. And I brought a lot of the political kind of thinking and strategy to those clients, and it was very, very successful. But I still had this passion for Hispanic. I saw not only from a business perspective, I saw there was a business opportunity there, of course, but I also had this passion because I grew up very Hispanic. I grew up in a very normal immigrant family, speaking Spanish at home, speaking English outside the home. Most of my friends growing up were Hispanic. I had American friends, of course, in high school, but most of my closest friends that we went out with and hung out with were Hispanic. So I never let go of my traditions, and so I felt very passionate about it. And if there was a business opportunity to pursue that connected with that passion, even better. And there was. And so we launched Access in 2005 with the idea of managing Hispanic engagement for major Fortune 500 companies that were part of the IPG system, the ecosystem. And we brought hopefully kind of a new perspective to things. It was not just about community relations or community engagement, but it was about brand building. It was about storytelling. It was about looking at omni-channel marketing in a way that you might have done it on the general market side, but back then you weren't really doing it on the Hispanic side. And I think that my agency was one of the pioneers in kind of bringing that new thinking to the table.
And as you think about that time when you launched Access, and because the bigger question for me is like, how does multicultural marketing itself has evolved, right? And maybe talk to me a little bit about some of those eras that we've sort of seen, right? Consolidation, there is like general market, there's a bunch of different ways that people have to approach multicultural. Kind of what was then, and then where do you see us now?
Yeah. So, when I first started in this business, it was all about translation. It was about taking something and figuring out a way to kind of adapt it into, the Hispanic world, if you will. And that was the infancy of where it all kind of started. Right. I think since then, there's been a lot of different levers that have been pulled that have kind of changed the industry completely. I think you mentioned a couple of them, right? One was consolidation with the general market. So this kind of a total market type of an approach, which I was never a huge fan of because I think it diluted the relevancy and the genuine, authentic nature of a program. And so I wasn't really a huge fan of a total market. And today I think that we're moving into a different era, which is original content produced specifically to speak to that particular audience. And because Hispanic today has become much more accepted, if you will, like, as Bad Bunny said, we're really the general market. And I keep telling my clients, I mean, when you look at the Hispanic market, you have to look at it from a general market perspective because if you look at LA, almost 50% of LA is Hispanic. So you tell me what is the general market in LA? It's Hispanic.
Sure.
And the same thing could be applied in Miami and in New York and in other places across the country. And so it has now become all about original content that speaks directly to us in a more culturally relevant way. Long gone are the days of translation, adaptation, figuring out how to fit into the total market pie. It's about customization that speaks directly to who we are as a people.
And I think that's been maybe the biggest evolution, right? Because Latino was always, for a long time, seen as the afterthought, right? Like you'll come up with your strategy, you come up with your messaging, and then how are the Spanish people gonna understand this? Oh, let's just translate, just come up with a version. And I think what you're speaking to is more, in some cases, the inverse is leading with Latino, leading with those insights, leading with culture. But still, when you look at multicultural marketing, it's still, in terms of dedicated agencies that are standalone, that is a much smaller universe now than what it used to be. How do you compete with that? How do you battle those conversations where people are saying, well, wait a minute, you're right. It's the same argument that you just made. You're in LA, it is general market. My team is reflective of the LA market. I have Latinos on my staff. I could do that as well. How are you navigating those terrains when having those conversations with clients?
Yeah.
And
I mean, and
pushing back maybe in those conversations.
You have to push back. Yeah. I mean, I think, look, there are great agencies, whether you're Hispanic or you're general market. There's a lot of really smart people that do it. And, I'm not somebody that thinks that you have to be, 100% Spanish dominant in order to be able to create commercials or, marketing for a company looking to engage the market. But you do need to be dedicated to understand the cultural movement. We don't lead with culture. We are culture. Right. What we bring to the table is
not an initiative. This is not like the flavor of the month.
No, it's not flavor of the month. You hire people that live the culture, that live the tradition, and live the legacy every single day. And so we're not taking something that is coming from a general market perspective and figuring out how to Hispanicize it. No, we're creating stuff that is unique, and the only way you can do that is if you're a part of the community, if you lead with culture, but you do it in an authentic way that really reflects in the creative and in the production of what you're actually producing.
Maybe to that point, are there any examples that come to mind with some of the work that you've done with some of your clients that sort of speak to exactly the point that you just made?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my clients here in Los Angeles is Aldi, the grocery stores, right? And so they've been around for 50 some years. They've been all over the country. They came to California about 10 years ago or so, and they launched a number of stores. And we've been a client of Univision for years on this. And one of the things that they found out that they had to tell the story a little bit differently in LA in order to connect with the community, right? They had their stores that were in heavy Hispanic neighborhoods, and that's fine. That helped us kind of tailor the message to them.
You're already kind of in the location where you needed to be.
We knew who we were talking to based on the zip code and whatnot. But we had to tell a different, unique story. We had to introduce the brand into the marketplace in a way that Hispanics could really kind of embrace and understand. And they had been doing it for a couple of years prior in English, but it really wasn't resonating. And so we took a step back and we said, okay, what are some of the key things that we need to educate people about in a way that really reflects our culture, our traditions, our shopping habits? And we did that in a unique way. I think we told a unique story, and it played very well and has been playing very well for 8 years. Their stores are doing incredibly well. They're growing across Southern California. And at the end of the day, the Hispanic market, and this is something that I'm not just saying, it's from the client themselves, the Hispanic market has built a reputation in this, the Hispanic stores rather have built a reputation in
What do you think were some of the things that connected the dots for Hispanic? Maybe wasn't fully understanding the value proposition of Aldi.
Part of it was understanding that the shopping habits, right? So as Hispanics, we understand that you're going to go to a Spanish specialty store to get your specific cut of meat or your tortillas or your frijoles,
carniceria,
right? Your carniceria, right? You're going to go there for sure. But you're also going to buy the normal stuff that most people buy, right? Which is bread and butter and milk and water, these kind of things. And so we kind of told a story that was unique to the Hispanic shopper, which is we know you go to different stores, and that's fine. Go to those stores. But before you go to those stores, come to Aldi and make sure you get the basics at the most competitive price that you're going to find in the marketplace. So shop Aldi first for the basics, and then we encourage you to go get those specialty items that you want for your family that are more specific to
so
culture.
You saw the competitive landscape, not Aldi versus La Carniceria de Michoacana, or instead is Aldi versus like a Ralph's or someone like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's
we were competing with
all your other needs that are more like your base case needs that you have for your house.
Exactly. So that was a different different focus, right? That was a different focus. The other one too that comes to mind is in 2013 we launched Covered California, which is the state health exchange. And for the first few months we were talking about choice in healthcare. which is fine. I mean, I think it's great to have choice in healthcare. You can shop one versus the other and determine what your specific needs are. But one of the insights that I had that I took to them early on in the process was that for Hispanics, a lot of times it wasn't about choice. It was about access. They didn't have access to healthcare. They didn't have a doctor that they could go to because they didn't have the insurance, they didn't have the money to pay, out of pocket. And so we flipped the script a little bit and say, okay, choice is important, but for Hispanics, choice might be number 2. The most important part of it is access to healthcare.
The message is the actual access.
Right. So we were getting at the health equity message, making sure that we addressed specific need of the community before we actually put the proposition of choices on the table.
Does that mean that the folks that you were sort of targeting were more people that didn't have insurance prior to this, rather than people that had maybe a crappy insurance or overpaying insurance that needed better options?
Right. Yeah, we were going after the uninsured, and the uninsured back in 2013 of the entire pie, 70% were Spanish language residents of California. And so we knew that, with 70% of the audience, goes back to your point about the general market. What's your general market? The general market is the Hispanic market, if that's if that's the audience that you're chasing. And we were chasing that particular audience to give them a chance to get health insurance. But you had to address the issue of access before you got to the question of choice.
When you put something together like that kind of strategy, how do you think about all the noise that is around, especially in the case of Cover California, right? Because we think about the initial launch of it, from Obamacare to there was all this additional noise around the whole idea behind it. And maybe some of this comes from your political background, but cutting through the noise to what's most important, which to your point is access. How do you even go about getting to the point of nailing that actual insight? What goes behind the process for you guys as you're thinking about this to get to that actual core insight?
Very, very research focused. I mean, all the insights, both those insights that I've just mentioned came out of research, specifically out of research. It wasn't something that was, in my gut or somebody mentioned it and I liked the idea or we threw it against the wall and it looked good. No, this is all research-based marketing. And so the only way you can develep a kind of performance.
And this is first-party research that you guys are doing?
Yeah, we do first-party, secondary. We did all sorts of comparison tables. There's different ways to kind of elicit that
nuggets,
insight.
Right.
And not one research is going to tell you everything you want to know. So you've got to do multiple different pieces of research to figure out from a quantitative, from a qualitative perspective, what is that insight that you're going to use to be able to tell that story. So we start with research, and some of that I think goes back to my political days, because when you do politics and you run a political campaign and you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't just do it on a whim, right? You have the research, you understand how you're going to move people, you educate people, but then you have to mobilize people. And so you got to have the right messaging in order to mobilize people. And so I felt it was the same thing for corporate America. If I'm going to mobilize Hispanics for Covered California to enroll, I got to understand what's driving their issue, what's their sentiment, what are some of the behavioral and attitudes that I have to figure out how to address in order to get them to take specific action, which was register with Covered California and then get health insurance.
And through some of this research, is there any examples that you could think of where the nugget that has come back has been one that was completely unexpected, where is not would have been the obvious choice, or really sort of change what the strategy is? So what I find many times with strategy shops is you may have a little bit of an idea, which is bad because sometimes you end up looking at the research through this lens and you use it more to validate something that you already thought rather to actually really look at it as a clean slate and figure out what the concept is. Is there a case where you did look at something this really changed the way that we think about messaging, marketing, the insight to be able to engage with an audience?
I think, more than that, though, there was kind of a refinement of the overall position. I think one good example of that is the U.S. Army. I did U.S. Army recruiting for many years. And one of the things that we discovered was that the Hispanics, the community in general, wanted to see what the Army was actually giving them back in the community, right? So we wanted to recruit young men and women to join the Army. There were lots of good reasons for people to join the military, but people wanted to, and parents in particular, wanted to know, what is the Army going to do for us in the community? So we sat back and we figured out, okay, so what are some of the major issues impacting our community? And one of the things that we discovered was that young Hispanics, were not doing very well in test taking. To join the Army, you got to take a test. You got to take a basic test to get into the Army. And Hispanics weren't doing as well as their counterparts. And so we said, okay, well, why is that? And so we developed a program with Princeton, which was called March to Life. And the whole program was based on helping people better understand how to take standardized testing. So whether you decided to go into the Army or decided to go into college and you got to take the SAT or the ACT or something like that, standardized testing skills are still very, very important. And so the Army provided that through labs all throughout the southwest part of the United States, so that we can help these students be better test takers. Ultimately, many of those then decided to enroll in the military. Some of them chose not to. They decided to go into college or a trade school or something of that nature. But that was a specific kind of insight that came out of research that we use as part of our messaging. It wasn't just recruiting in the community; it was giving back to the community.
And in this case, was the Army the one that was funding this?
Yes.
How do you convince them to do that? Because it makes sense what you're saying, right? The community, or people wanted to make sure that there was like an investment in the community, right? And you're creating that. And you're also serving a very specific need that, look, at some extent is a little self-serving, because the better they do in these tests, the more likely they are to join the Army. But it requires an investment that is more than a marketing campaign, that has longer term impact that may or may not directly benefit the Army. So how do you present a more sophisticated strategy like that requires of investment, that isn't 100% transactional, that isn't like we're going to see an immediate ROI on this?
Well, I think part of it, of course, you have to understand this is all funded by the U.S. government, right?
Sure.
So there's plenty of money there to be able to spend, and the Army and the military spend billions of dollars on recruitment. So the money and the resources were there. But you're absolutely right. I had to convince one of the generals that were running this campaign that this was a worthwhile investment that was going to give us a return on this investment in the years to come. One of the things that we stressed was we needed to move away from sponsorship into partnership. In our community, it's not enough simply to sponsor an event or to put your logo on a step and repeat at a conference or something like that. We actually were really focused on developing programs in partnership with different community organizations. And that then gave us the opportunity, the legitimacy, the card to go into the community and say, okay, we're partnering with X, X, and X, and we're going to develop this program that is going to address your specific needs. And yes, it might help the Army, but it's also going to help your community. And I think that's how most people in the community saw it. It's something that we were giving back.
And obviously within all of this, the storytelling of how you then tell that story, how you market that story becomes a really important aspect.
Absolutely, yeah. Storytelling.
How do you go about making sure that those are the kind of impactful stories that are going to both highlight that insight and create the kind of impact that that you're looking to create?
Yeah, I mean, we had great copywriters and storytellers on staff that could tell that story from the perspective of the individual, right? It wasn't from the perspective of the Army, but it was from the perspective of the family and the individual, and then our community partners. And then, of course, we had a great media team that was able to kind of figure out from an omni-channel perspective, where, or multi-channel perspective, where we're going to put that message in order to be able to to get the best value for it. And so we heavy up on digital, we heavied up on linear TV. We did a ton of work in the community, as a promotional work in the community as well. So we had great insights, great people that to kind of write the story, and then we had terrific performance media experts that can tell us exactly how to drive that and target the audience.
I think a big aspect of that and ultimate effectiveness is how authentic ultimately it all comes out, right? It's interesting. I'm curious what your POV is, because I've kind of gone the route of I almost prioritize authenticity even more than good storytelling, in the sense that when someone's like really feels something, when it's really like their story, like it just comes across. They may not be a great necessarily storyteller, but it kind of indexes more, because I think the other side of that is great storytelling, but without the authenticity of maybe some of the life experience, it doesn't always translate. As a matter of fact, today we were, I was getting together with our team, who's actually here in the audience from in partnership with our Univision Foundation. We have M&J group that is here who presented all their projects, and one of the things that we were talking about with them is all the projects they presented, a number of them being like content projects, some of them being more PSA type content initiatives around some of the challenges with AI, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. Others about really creating more safer spaces for people, especially young people who are struggling with different challenges, who maybe have children when they're really young, that need that kind of support. But the part that was obvious to me in speaking to all of them is how personal all these stories actually are. And my argument to them was like, that's actually really important. Like all this other stuff could be taught, could be trained. You could learn from, frankly, from looking at what others are doing. But that authenticity piece is such an important aspect of storytelling.
Authenticity is number one. From authenticity comes a good story. You can have a good story, but if it's unauthentic, it's going to fall flat. And I've seen that for years in marketing and in politics as well, frankly, right? So it's got to be authentic. It's got to be genuine. When it is, it's gonna really have bring value to the marketing mix.
And I feel like everyone's telling that story, while at the same time, there's so much movement and efforts around AI and the role that it's going to have, or it's having, and how it's impacting how we tell stories, how we create content. I think the promise that I hear too many folks actually bring up, this idea that, all you need is just put in this prompt and you'll have your own commercial. Put in this prompt, you have your own movie. Someone was saying this, which I think is a ridiculous thought, that like, at one point that, we're gonna be sitting at home, what we wanna watch? I don't know, we'll just put in a prompt, but an entire movie will just come out of nowhere that we're gonna love. And I think people are getting so caught up with the ability and capabilities of what AI can do that they're forgetting the importance of storytelling, the importance of actually creativity, that even with great technology, which I really believe that, you need that. Like, what's your perspective of the impact that AI is having, where it's going? How are you seeing already impact your business as it goes now?
Yeah, look, I mean, AI.
Are you getting pushed on it? People say, like, why do I need to even hire you? I could just do my own AI commercial because I could just put in a couple prompts and look at that. It's awesome.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, thankfully. I haven't seen that.
I have a company I can show you that has something pretty interesting.
I haven't seen that, thankfully, but I do recognize the innovation and the revolution associated with AI. It is both a huge opportunity and a little concerning at the same time, right? Because obviously it's new technology that people don't quite understand. When the internet first appeared in the early 2000s, nobody knew exactly what to expect, and it's developed into what it's developed. AI, I think, is on the same course. I think at the end of the day, AI is great as a starter. We use it on a pretty regular basis to kind of begin the process. But without the human elements.
Like, what are some of those use cases for you?
Well, like for example, when we're doing some research, right? And so you want to start at least with some sort of a thesis or some sort of a benchmark, so that then you can begin to test it, right? And AI helps you kind of aggregate all the information that's out there, whatever insight might be out there that other people have talked about or people have written about. You take that, you study it, you determine whether there's validity to it, and then you kind of run it through an AI model. I
always tell people, hey, run it through AI, but then trust and verify, because
100%.
Because it gets a little wonky at times.
Right, and then one thing that they don't ever get perfectly right is the cultural relevancy of that information, right? So they can spit out data and they can spit out specific insight, but how that relates to our culture and our traditions, that part is only comes into play when a human that is part of the community can input that thought into the process. Because if not, it's going to be just a kind of generic kind of response. I've always said to people, a general market ad that you put into Spanish is still a general market ad.
Right.
There's no difference. It's in language, but it doesn't mean.
You just turn on the SAP on it, and that's really what you got.
Exactly.
Right.
So same thing with AI. It's going to give you a basic framework. From that basic framework, then you have to kind of work it, and you got to add the cultural relevancy and the authenticity and any other specific insights that might allow you to to kind of frame that message.
Is this something that you are like actively encouraging the team to use, or what's the way that you guys are kind of going about it?
Yeah, we are actively encouraging people to learn more about AI, to understand how it works, how it applies to the work that we're doing. We're never replacing our work with AI, but as a supplement, it's a great supplement to have. It's just another tool that we use in our arsenal to be able to produce commercials or marketing campaigns in the fastest, quickest possible time that we can. And so there's a lot of functionality to it. I think it's got a long way to go, and I think the cultural piece to me is kind of the most interesting piece, because there are still Hispanics from a AI perspective. The AI has not really fully understood the Hispanic market. For example, if you ask it to give you information about small businesses, Hispanic small businesses, it's going to then push out information about maybe some of the cultural elements associated with Hispanics and why they went into business. But it doesn't actually provide you with that specific insight about the success of Hispanic businesses, the rise of Hispanic small businesses across the country. It misses that dynamic because it doesn't know that dynamic, right? And that dynamic is where we come into play, and we provide that narrative to the basic information that it provides us. No client has ever asked me to produce an AI campaign. So for me and my agency, it's a tool that we use to be able to do our job in a more efficient way.
In the actual creative self, are you starting to use AI?
No.
Are you considering it?
No.
That's interesting. We have.
No.
So I'll give you the use case that we have. So we did a campaign. I forget now who the client is that we did a campaign for, but it was on the health side, and we developed this little character, this little brain, that was giving all this advice of things to do that are good for your brain, right? What was interesting is like everything about that character was very Latino. It wasn't just broad Latino. It was like the character was Chava, who's part of our team here, that I think developed a lot of it. He was actually the voice of it. And what I loved about it, it wasn't just generic Latino, is that it really spoke through a very specific lens, which is like someone from northern Mexico. It had all the sayings, it had all like a lot of sort of character associated with it. But the actual design of it was done through AI. The graphics that were done was done through AI. So it helped to sort of facilitate or bring to life a different kind of execution that maybe otherwise before we may have not considered. We may say like, that's going to take too much time, too much effort. We may not do that. So it wasn't the insight. It wasn't the voice. It wasn't the strategy. What it was is an element that would have otherwise, once again, been a lot harder to do but before using something like that.
I mean, I could definitely see the mechanical application there, right? If you're resizing ads or creating some sort of illustration or something, I get it. I mean, I see there's probably some value with respect to that. But we're still doing it old school from that perspective. We're still having our own designers, our own creative people that know the market, kind of take those insights and develop that product or that unit.
I mean, did you see that story about this? I'm blanking the name of the character or actress. But there's a studio that just launched the first kind of AI actress. Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
Like all kinds of controversy. Yeah, that one, I just don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, I don't, those are the problems that you have with new technology and figuring out, from a privacy perspective and, IP perspective, what you can do and what you can't do. So we're going to go through a process, I think, where people are going to understand, how far you can take this, and then regulators are going to push us back. I mean, California just yesterday, I think, signed some legislation, and Governor Newsom signed legislation to kind of regulate the AI industry to some degree, right? So that's going to be the next step here, is going to be some regulatory kind of guidance in order to be able to figure out how this moves forward. But they'll figure it out, just like they figured out the internet, and the internet has been a huge resource to agencies and to consumers and business leaders. And I think AI is going to be the same thing. It's the next big wave.
I guess part of what I find really interesting about that dynamic, about the actress, this AI actress, digital actress, is part of the beauty of storytelling and seeing, especially in a case, like it's different like if it's like an AI character that is like animation, right? That's different. But it's not. It's supposed to be like someone that is, meant to like take the role of what a person normally do. It's like there's this idea of seeing an actor really embody so much of character that you forget they're that actor, right? Like that's there's such a beauty about that aspect itself, and I think that's actually one of the things that I find really interesting. One of the podcasts that we had that we recorded with Isabel Guzman, was it Isabel? No, with Stacey Darmas. I started talking about seeing some of these guerrilla influencers, like guerrilla podcasts, and now I'm like, I get like dog video podcasts all the time. And I find those hilarious. And part of it is because clearly it's not a real dog, but because it's like we're all in on the joke that we know this is AI, we know it's not real, but yet what they're saying, it's like, feel like dog insights, if I want to call them that, right? And that almost feels like a better use case than when you're trying to convince me something that is not real is real. I feel like that kind of works counter. Like my mind will reject it more because you're trying to convince me that it's real. That makes sense?
Well, and I go back to my earlier point about authenticity. Authenticity is the most important thing, right? So if you're producing something through AI,
counter, right? Like it feels very counter in those efforts.
Yeah, it's not authentic. I mean, and everybody, every producer, creative director has their own style, right? And personally, I like the testimonial style, this kind of photojournalistic perspective. I think that eliciting testimonial from people and their own experiences and expressing those experiences in a way that kind of engages and educates you is a very powerful way to kind of connect in our community, because in our community, of course, the leaders in our community have a lot of influence over the rest of us, right? And so that testimonial perspective, I've used it in commercial after commercial after commercial, because I think it really sparks interest and it sparks a certain dynamic kind of connection. And you can't do that with AI because, to your point, people know that it's AI. And so they're looking at this guy that kind of looks like us, but speaks a little bit like us, but is he really not? Something's off, right?
Slightly off,
Something's off. It's not authentic. And so that's why one of the reasons I've kind of stood back and said, I'm not sure I really want to use AI for the creative process, because I want the authenticity to kind of come out. And to me, testimonials is the best way to do that. I think it's the most endearing way, and it creates advocacy for the brand.
Yeah, I recently was talking to this company that is built a really interesting software. In part, it actually comes from, I think they acquired, I forget what the exact story was, some of the technology that was being used to do some of the visual graphics for some of like the action hero movies. I don't know if it was Marvel, one of those, but like obviously those are very sophisticated in terms of some of their graphics. And they added an AI engine to it, and then added creatives to it. So now you start seeing some of the content like, well, that actually looks really interesting.
Right.
But I think this idea of, but everything that I was seeing did feel much more of like, where authenticity was not like the major driver of what the messaging was, right? It was more like the visual representation, or like the aesthetics was probably more bigger driver. It will be interesting what happens when you take that kind of approach, because of like full AI content, and apply something that is supposed to have heart.
Right.
And connectivity, right? Like that is where I feel like
we're not there.
It's tough. Like that's going to be a tough stretch.
We're not there. We're not there yet, and it's probably going to be a few years before we get to that point. I think it still requires the human touch in order to produce that authenticity, that genuineness that you want in in a spot to be able to engage consumer.
But you yourself are a storyteller, right? Like you're involved in producing a pretty successful actually podcast.
Yeah.
Biste. Tell me about it. I just found out about it as I was doing some research on your background. Yeah. Give me the breakdown of how that came to be and what's it about. And
good friend of mine in Miami, a guy named Manny Ruiz, wrote a terrific script called Biste about the situation in Cuba. My family's from Cuba, and his family was from Cuba. He's traveled to Cuba a number of times and did some kind of photography and journalism with respect to what's happening in Cuba. And we wanted to kind of we were interested in producing a story that kind of changed the dynamic around the Cuban story, right? So we wanted to get away from this side versus that side. We wanted to bring in some sort of like a human connection, a human element that allowed for reconciliation, because we feel that at this point, 60 years into the Castro regime, there's probably an opportunity, if the situation is right, for some sort of reconciliation. And so we wanted to kind of bring in a story that kind of told people not only what's happening in Cuba, but also kind of give them some inspiration through a love story. And so we came up with a script that I think is powerful. We've produced 11 different episodes associated with it in both English and Spanish. Sound, actors. It's won a couple of awards from Audible.
Is it an anthology? Is it a series? Or what is it?
It's a 13 episode limited series.
Okay.
And we're hoping to
scripted.
Scripted fiction.
Oh,
so we're hoping to be able to take that and sell it to to somebody and make a movie out of it. And I think it's a unique kind of look at the situation in Cuba from a different perspective. So it's a great opportunity to tell a story and to tell it in a genuine, authentic way. It's really, at the end of the day, based on what Manny saw in Cuba when he went there, the number of times he went in Cuba. And so they're real stories that come out of Cuba that nobody's actually told.
Yeah. Do you think that your experience of growing up in the West Coast gives you a little bit different perspective of thinking more about that reconciliation than if you would have grown up in the East Coast? And the reason I ask is because it's so, I would say, like, as someone Mexican in background that was not very educated in terms of the Cuban story and what was happening there. I remember in high school, everyone wore the Che Guevara shirts here. Like, there was a big part of like, oh, you're in that rebel phase. And I remember going there, and then you start hearing all the stories of people's personal stories. So what they went through to escape, and what happened to family members. Like, I could very much understand why people are not quite ready to turn the page. So that's why it's interesting you said that. And I'm wondering if that experience sort of played a role for you.
Yeah, I don't know that it played a role for me. I think my perspective on Cuba is probably pretty similar to the same perspective you're going to see in Miami for the most part. But I've also come to the realization that we can't fight the fight in Cuba from two political sides. We've got to figure out how to bring us together in some way and tell a different story. And so our goal was to tell the stories that we learned in Cuba, and to tell them, on a much broader, stage or on a broader screen. But my views are probably similar to what you see in Miami. There has to be some sort of a change in Cuba in order to bring freedom and liberty to the folks that live on the island. And until that change begins, we won't be able to tell those stories. And so it's an opportunity to begin to advance those stories in a way that kind of changes the whole kind of perspective on Cuba.
And your thought will be, for at least for the series, to also be making it into a film or into a
That's our hope.
Series?
Yeah, our hope is we're in the process of kind of, finalizing, the final script, for a film, right? We had a script for this audio series podcast, but now we're kind of changing the script a little bit to be able to kind of get it ready for film production. We've got a couple of producers on board that are, figured out how to do this, where we're going to film it. We've got actors lined up. We've got a couple of names that we haven't announced yet, but a couple of names that are pretty well known. I can't make news to you today, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes on this one, so I'll let somebody else do that. But we've got some names associated with it. I think are going to be,
so it's a lot further along then. That's great.
Yeah, we're trying to move it. I mean, it's not an easy task. Making a movie is
Is this your first film?
It is.
Very cool.
It would be the first one, yeah.
Well, that's super exciting. Well, you're going to have to let us know when that happens.
I will. I'll be back
and share the news. You talked a little bit about your political experience earlier and sort of working on a strategy. And then even now, obviously, with the multicultural side and what you've done there, one thing that I wanted to, and no, we talked about talking about this, which is the role of D&I, right? And we know we're in a really interesting moment in the sense that, we went through a few years back like in 2020, where it was like the hot thing that a lot of corporations were committing to, a lot of people were staffing up on. Some with really good intent and really with a long-term view. Others did not feel that way. It was a little like check the box and now we're done. Right. Now we're in a point where that seems to be, people have really shied away from that. And what's your sense in terms of how do you guys think about that? Because some of those efforts also had direct impact in multicultural focused companies, media companies, agencies. Like there was a whole kind of halo effect that happened off of the focus on D&I. And I'm wondering, like for you, how do you sort of navigated that? How do you guys sort of thought about it and approach that issue?
Yeah, I think we've been in a unique position because we, as an agency, have never really been focused on corporate DEI programs, right? I don't see that as part of my remit, with my clients. And so it goes back to authenticity. To your point is a second ago, a lot of the companies that I saw that were really pushing DEI programs were checking a box. Yeah. They were doing it for political reasons. They were doing it to make favor with a regulator in Washington or something of that nature. And so I always question if there really was a deep commitment there. My view is that we should be focused on chasing our audience as opposed to chasing some sort of diversity program.
Right.
Nothing wrong with diversity programs. I think many of the programs, the campaigns that we do are kind of through the lens of diversity, but we also do it through the lens of your audience. Yeah. If you're a brand and your audience are Hispanics, then you have to program to Hispanics. Yeah. You have to market to Hispanics because that's your audience. Yeah. And so that is a much more authentic kind of view of this than simply checking a box with a corporate program that to say, oh, I've done DEI. Chase your audience, understand the insights that you need in order to be able to engage that particular audience, and I think that creates authenticity that ultimately drives brand engagement.
I mean, it's tough. I've spoken to a few folks that had some of these roles, and it was tough for them because many came in with great expectations of what they were going to be able to achieve and influence their corporation, and then found themselves in a situation where they were like, they were it. Like, people felt like, well, we had that person, and that person gets to weigh in on everything and things that they're expert in, they're not expert in, but they're in some extent put in a corner, right? Like not really, it's not a real commitment against the audience. And I think that's ultimately falls short, ultimately doesn't achieve what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I always felt, that many of the clients that I had that were in the kind of DEI space, they were consultants. Yeah. They didn't have budget, they didn't have staff. They were there to, to voice an opinion, to hopefully help guide. Usually
a person that can maybe say no, but can definitely not say yes.
Exactly.
And that's a problem.
That's a problem. So I would rather be talking to the CMO that understands who the audience is, as opposed to somebody on the DEI side that I think has a good perspective and a worthwhile perspective, but doesn't have the budget or the authority to actually move a campaign. And so that goes back to my point about authenticity and making sure that you're talking to the people that actually have control over something versus somebody that is there to simply advise the process. You want that person on your team, but you really want the people that have the resources to be able to greenlight a campaign.
I guess to me, maybe the broader sentiment, which I've always been a fan of, is have the inside look like the outside. And what I mean by that is, actually I was talking about this the other day with someone from our team, which is, we were talking about content, around entrepreneurial content. I would take someone that is obsessed with entrepreneurship and consuming content that is around entrepreneurship, that's someone that is an expert at creating content. Right. Because that expertise of the topic, the subject is much, much better, right? Like I had before coming back to Univision, to TelevisaUnivision, is I ran a I launched a sports company. And I found that out pretty quickly is when we got people that were true, fully obsessed sports fans, they were always better. It didn't matter skill set. They were always better than those that were really good at the mechanics, really good at the tactics, but just did not love sports. Just could not get as much out of them. And part of it is because those people that were sports fans understood much better who our audience was. Right. So you almost need to have that kind of setting. And so I think that's super important. The other one that I would say, and who I really enjoyed, I recently was chatting with Ana Valdez, and I love her perspective because she really looks at this not from the place that invest in Latinos because it's the right thing to do or because it's some kind of charity case or some kind. No, she talks about no. Look at the trillions of dollars that this community is generating for this country. It's a massive economic opportunity, which should be critical for your business. And thus, when you take that as a position, it just has much more longer-term commitments to development, to supporting, to making sure that you're actually trying to capture that economic opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with Anna 100% on that. I mean, I think we need to stop looking at it from a philosophical perspective. Of course there are needs in our community. You cannot ignore that. If you do, you're putting your head in the sand, right? But you have to make a business case. You have to make the business case to the C-suite as to why you need to have a Hispanic campaign on television or on radio or on digital or whatever. And if you approach it that way, you're gonna get buy-in much quicker than if you do from a philosophical perspective.
I agree with you. Look, ultimately though, I guess when you think about the business that you're in, which is the agency business, and whether it's through AI, whether it's through some of these shifts that have happened within multicultural, talk to me a little bit about how do you see the role of the agency itself evolving, kind of where it's headed. I talk about this with some other folks from the perspective that I think the average tenure now of a CMO is like 18 months. They're like the new, they're like the new NFL coach, right? Where you used to be like you get a couple of seasons in. Now you are, you get halfway through the season, they're already like looking at maybe making a change. It's kind of what CMOs are, and frankly, for you, I have to imagine that also impacts your tenure with those companies because as CMOs come and go, that usually means potential changes in who they're actually working with. So tell me a little bit about that, about the broader business of an agency and the role that it continues to play, or that it will continue to play as we go forward.
I mean, we've seen it, you just described, we see it as well. I mean, you're tied to a CMO, that person's gone, and then the whole program is at risk or in jeopardy. I mean, I think we've been lucky that we've had long-term relationships with our clients. Some of our clients go back 8 to 10 years. And so I think that not only tells you the story about about the CMO that's guiding the program and the C-suite support that they have at the company, but it also tells you about the level of commitment and dedication that we bring to our campaigns and the ideas, the insights that we bring to our clients. I think the role of agencies over the next couple of years is going to change in that it's going to be much more strategic focused. It's going to be whoever handles the data, mines the data in the most efficient and most effective way, and be able to use that data to create insights on a strategic perspective. That to me is where agency life is going. I think that less and less you're seeing big, huge, full-scale production, big, kind of artistic, thematical production. It's really about insights. They're looking for people to help them kind of navigate the opportunity, to figure out who their customer is and how to drive that opportunity forward. So I think we're going to see much more about storytelling, but from a strategic perspective, as opposed to simply just producing big TV spots.
Right. So in some ways, do you start to see yourself more as an advisor to the CMO and CEO? On strategy, on investment, on gaining market share, less execution, I would say.
I think it's more about business consulting, again, making the business case than the actual kind of production of a specific creative unit or
do you think that changes certain like functions, departments within agencies that start to either go away or become a lot smaller as a result of that?
And we've seen that. I mean, I think there's been a big consolidation of agencies in the last couple of years. I mean, agencies like mine have survived, but there's a lot of other agencies that have died and are no longer around. And I think the ones that survive are surviving because they have very smart strategists on board that can help navigate this landscape for people and can kind of help them kind of figure out creatively what the output is going to be. but it should never be about the creative output from the beginning. It needs to be about strategy first and then the creative output.
Right.
And a couple of years ago, I think we were the exact opposite. We were pushing creative and content, and that's all we were talking about. Yeah. And today, I think
like the Mad Men days, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. I got this great idea. Trust me.
Idea.
Right. Well, those days are long gone.
Yeah.
And so today, it's the foundation of that ecosystem is really about data mining and strategy, and then ultimate navigation.
But the anchor of that is data, right?
Like, absolutely.
So tell me about that. Like, what from your own efforts? You talked about some of the internal research you guys are doing. How has that evolved since you started that process and doing research and using data to support strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we've got
what's been the evolution? Where do you see that evolution to continue to go?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a whole team of people that are studying these trends on a regular basis that can tell you, much more than I can about what's the next thing that's going to come up in, in life. But I think it's a matter of managing that data and understanding that data, but also then putting it through the prism of kind of the cultural awareness, right? Because data is data. You can get data anywhere you want, and you can have data tell you whatever you want it to tell you. But the cultural piece that is associated with that data, to me, is still the piece that is most important, right? So while data is still king, the strategy piece associated with it and the insights that come out of it, that's God. That's God. That's ultimately what's going to drive people's attention.
But that's the hardest part.
That's the hardest part. And you need smart navigators, strategists, armed with data, armed with tradition, the cultural tradition and the relevancy that you associate with the market, and be able to put that into play.
I mean, even you start thinking about data sources and type of data, right? Which is things that are direct responses, surveys, versus things that are behavioral, which is all of the other data points that we get to see that are sort of implied, not specific, and how are those all informing like success, right? Like we were having this debate the other day internally around about some content and sort of the distinction between distribution and engagement of the content. And one of the arguments that I would make is that I think when it comes, especially in social platforms, that content engagement is way more important than distribution because the algorithms are so good now at detecting whether a content has the right elements to engage audiences that it doesn't matter if it exposes us to a broader set of people. It doesn't need that much exposure to figure out that it's just not there. It's part of the point of why certain content will go really viral without it having a big following.
Right.
Which on the counter of that argument will be is that the idea of having a big following becomes minimized to some extent.
Exactly.
Because you see so much of that. You see so many of these massive brands, but then you look at their engagement rate at like 0.0000. That means people are not even seeing the content anymore.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, you can create a program, with the right algorithm and the right the right data that is a mile wide. And that's fine. If you're looking for broad awareness, a mile wide is fantastic. But when you're talking about the Hispanic market, I'd rather be an inch deep than a mile wide. I want to go as deep as I possibly can to understand exactly what motivates people, understand their attitude and their behaviors. And so that, I think, is what I look at in research, is not the broad-based perspective, but the unique kind of lower funnel perspective that's ultimately going to be able to give me the insight I need to drive that level of engagement. And that doesn't come from data. That comes from data from a framework perspective, but it also gets that back to the idea of understanding the cultural insights.
Well, I would say if you understand the culture well, then you know what are the questions to ask and what to be looking into. And the idea of micro communities or these like niche markets, a place like LA, we're such a big DMA that you start breaking that down into the individual sub-communities within there. There's a lot to be said about, as an example, what is the Latino experience in Koreatown? Right. Well, that's going to have Korean influence for sure, but it's going to have probably a little Central American kind of vibe to it as well. And that in itself, knowing that nuance will give you a different strategy altogether.
Here's another nuance that we've worked with over the years is the whole kind of Black Hispanic.
Oh, tell me about that.
Right? There's in the Caribbean, Black Hispanics are very large percentage of the population, right? And that's a unique identity. You're both Hispanic and you also have the Black experience. And so a lot of marketers do not understand that kind of kind of dimension, right? You're either Hispanic or you're Black. Well, in this case, you're both, and both of those identities drive who you are today. And so I'm seeing a lot of cultural and kind of cultural blending, if you will, and it's not necessarily something that's just happening, but it's by design. People are associating with different cultures that connect with them in an authentic way, and that's a unique piece that I think most marketers they haven't quite figured out how to manage, and brands have definitely not figured out how to manage because they're looking at it from a superficial level.
You know, we've talked about it, and a lot of people still talk, take this position now. Think about Latinos at 200%, right? Like 100% Latino, 100% American.
Right.
But then you could take that, if you double click on that, you could start sort of looking at the different sort of sub-pockets of communities. Afro-Latinos being one that, to your point, there's this 200% that also can be, in many cases, very connected to even the African-American community, like a lot more sort of overlap there, which I think goes back to the bigger argument that I would always make, which is I see Latinos as the super connectors. As when you use a Latino insight, it tends to resonate more because we just have more in common with a lot more people. And I think that's what makes it really interesting. I always think about who was the beer campaign that did Modelo, I think, right? The spirit of a fighter. Like that whole idea about being super blue collar. And I remember the first time I saw Damian Lillard, one that was a basketball player, featured in one of them. I'm like, that's a Latino insight that clearly resonates, translates to any other kind of group very well, and something that's almost aspirational, right? So I think people can see that pretty well and be able to connect with it. But once again, knowing how to activate it, knowing how to put that into story, becomes a really important thing.
I mean, you got to find the foundation, but then you have to add. You got to add that relevancy, right? You can bake a great cake, but after you got to put the icing on it. And that icing on it, to me, is always the cultural insight that generates the authenticity that you need for engagement.
100%. Super, super valuable and helpful. One thing I want to cover to you before we wrap up is, we also see part of these conversations an opportunity for those that may be watching or listening to also learn something from you, and especially in something that could be useful as they're navigating their career, as they're navigating their businesses. Especially because you've had these like very different chapters in life that yes, they correlate or they translate, I guess you would say that, but very different chapters. Like, what are some of those lessons that have been valuable to you?
Years ago, when I first started my career, somebody told me something that I thought was brilliant, and I have kept this my entire life, which is have a point of view. Nobody wants to hire somebody that does not have a point of view, right? You don't want somebody that doesn't have a thought in their head about what's happening in life in general, whether it's sports or entertainment or culture or marketing or politics, whatever it is. Have a point of view because it frames the individual. It allows us to become much more kind of a human if you have a point of view. So make sure that when you go into an interview, when you build a career, that you have a point of view that you can actually articulate. The other thing that I think is really important, I know it's kind of tactical, but I think it's a very important point, is be a good writer. In our business, in marketing, you have to be a good writer. You have to be able to take an idea and communicate that idea in a way that actually speaks to that brand and to that individual. So be a good writer so you can express it, and you can communicate it to a client. So those are the two things that in my career have always helped me, being a good writer and having a point of view, regardless of what that point of view is going to be, but have something that you can come to the table with.
I'm going to answer your second one because I think being a writer is important. And I think the watch out for people now with technology is don't over rely on AI. Because people have gone really lazy in terms of what they write and how they write. And when you're over relying, that you're not doing that critical thinking. It's just a tool that absolutely should be used. And I use it all the time. But I think it's something that should be used. I think you're about having a perspective is a really, really good insight. I would say is the kind of thing that, people have asked me, I've always had a lot of opinions, unfortunately, or fortunately. But it's part of the reason what makes you sort of take opportunity to stand out. And this is not something that I learned or gained now, it's something that I've been doing for a long time. And the truth is, for those leaders that didn't appreciate it, they're probably the wrong leaders for you. And for those that did appreciate it, it's exactly the kind of people that you want to have as mentors. And I think either way, when you take that kind of approach and you give a perspective, that's what we as leaders are looking for. We're looking for people to add value, add ideas for us to be able to enhance a concept, right?
Absolutely.
That's great advice.
I've always hired people that I've always felt were smarter than me. I don't need people that don't have a perspective or some sort of intellectual kind of bent. I need people that are smart, that think things through, maybe think a little bit differently, that complement what I bring to the table and what my agency brings to the table, and that's all rooted around the idea of having a point of view, of being a well-read, well-spoken person that thinks about things and can express those things.
Final point. We talked about AI. We talked multicultural agencies. What's one big prediction that you have of trends, something that's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an extension of a trend that's already out there, which is consumer-generated content. I think with the rise of TikTok and Reels and different other other platforms, I think it's all about consumer-generated content. Agencies are going to have to take a little bit of a back seat to consumers in the way they generate content and the way that content lives on different platforms.
Sure.
For years we've been very protective about that, right? It's got to come from an agency. It's got to come from
premium.
It's got to, exactly. And
I love that.
I never subscribed to that, and I'm thrilled to see that today. Consumer-generated content is really kind of what is driving engagement. And I think you're going to see much more in that in the future. And you're going to see agencies partnering with independent creators to be able to do that on a much broader level.
Completely agree. Armando, if people want to know more about the Access Agency or yourself, where should they go?
Yeah, they come to my website, theaccessagency.com.
Great. Armando, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right.